"Don't do that," the nun begged. The mountain man ignored her, and the town went mad. The small town of Pinecrest lay quietly at the edge of the great mountain range. Nestled between dense forests and rocky hills, the town seemed almost untouched by time. The streets were narrow and winding, lined with small wooden houses, their roofs often covered in snow during the winter months. Smoke drifted gently from the chimneys, carrying the scent of wood and baking bread. Children played near the river that ran through the town, their laughter echoing against the cliffs. Life here moved slowly, marked by the rhythm of the seasons and the unspoken rules passed down from one generation to the next. Pinecrest was a town of traditions. Every Sunday, the townspeople would gather at the old chapel, a simple stone building with a small bell tower. They prayed together, sang hymns, and shared stories of the past. Everyone knew everyone else, and strangers were rare. So when a lone figure appeared at the edge of town, one crisp autumn morning, the whole town took notice. He was a mountain man, tall and rugged, with hair that had the color of old pine bark, and eyes as sharp as a hawk's. His clothes were worn and patched, the kind that had weathered many seasons in the wild. He carried a heavy pack, filled with supplies for survival, and a walking stick that looked more like a piece of driftwood than a tool. He moved with quiet confidence, each step careful yet determined, as if he had learned to trust the ground beneath his feet more than anything else in the world. The townspeople watched him with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. Some whispered to their neighbors, wondering who he was and why he had come. Others, especially the children, were drawn to him like moths to a warm light. There was something magnetic about his presence, something that made people want to look but also keep a safe distance. Sister Mary, a young nun who had lived in Pinecrest all her life, was among the first to notice him. She had a kind face, gentle eyes, and a voice that carried warmth wherever she went. She had taken vows to help and protect others, and she had a deep respect for the mountains that surrounded the town. She felt a strange unease as she watched the mountain man. It wasn't fear exactly, but a quiet warning that something about him was unusual, something that could lead to trouble if ignored. She approached him carefully, keeping her distance at first. "Good morning," she called softly, her voice blending with the sound of the river. The man turned, his eyes meeting hers. There was no hostility in his gaze, only a calm, unshakable focus. He nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and continued walking toward the town square. Sister Mary followed him at a safe distance, hoping to learn more. She had seen many travelers pass through Pinecrest, but few had carried the same air of quiet authority and experience that this man had. As he reached the square, he paused to look around, taking in the layout of the town, the small shops, and the faces of the people who watched him with curiosity. The mayor, an older man with graying hair and a kind smile, stepped forward. "Welcome to Pinecrest," he said. "I'm Thomas, the town's mayor." "You don't see many strangers around here. What brings you to our town?" The mountain man smiled faintly, a smile that was brief but genuine. "I'm just passing through," he said in a voice that was low but steady. "I need supplies and a place to rest before I continue up the mountain." The mayor nodded, though his expression showed concern. "The mountains can be dangerous. It's easy to get lost or hurt if you're not careful." "I can take care of myself," the man replied simply. There was no arrogance in his tone, only quiet certainty. Sister Mary stepped closer, her hands folded in front of her. "Please," she said gently, "be careful. The mountains have many hidden dangers. Don't do anything you might regret." The mountain man looked at her for a moment, and she felt a shiver of something she couldn't quite name. It wasn't fear of him, but a feeling that he might not listen, no matter how carefully she spoke. "I'll be fine," he said at last, almost as if reassuring her rather than himself. Despite his calm demeanor, the town remained on edge. People began to talk in hushed tones about him. Some admired his courage, his self-sufficiency, and the way he seemed completely at home in the wilderness. Others worried that his disregard for the town's warnings could bring danger. The children, curious and unafraid, followed him from a distance, whispering excitedly to one another about the strange man who had come from the mountains. Over the next few hours, the mountain man moved quietly through the town. He visited the general store where the shopkeeper, a stout woman named Helen, watched him closely as he picked out supplies. He chose only what he needed: dried food, a warm coat, strong boots, and a rope. There was an economy to his actions, a simplicity that impressed Helen. He paid with coins that had clearly traveled long distances, their value unmistakable even in this small town. By the afternoon, he had made his way to the edge of the forest, where the first steep trails of the mountain began. Sister Mary followed at a distance, worried about what he might do next. She had seen hikers come and go, but none had the same air of determination as this man. There was a stubbornness in him, a refusal to heed the kind warnings of others. As he prepared to climb, he paused and looked back at the town below. The view was breathtaking. The rooftops, the winding streets, the river glittering in the sunlight. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the crisp mountain air. Sister Mary called out again, her voice carrying over the breeze. "Please be careful!" "Don't do that." The mountain man's gaze met hers once more, and he nodded slightly, almost in acknowledgement. But then, without another word, he began his ascent. His steps were steady and deliberate, each one placing him closer to the rocky cliffs above. Sister Mary watched, her heart heavy with a mix of hope and fear. She knew the mountains better than most, and she knew how unforgiving they could be. As the sun began to dip behind the peaks, the town grew quiet. People had gathered near the square, watching the distant figure climbing higher and higher. Whispers turned into anxious conversations. What was he doing up there? Why did he ignore the nun's warning? Some felt a sense of excitement, imagining the adventures he might have. Others feared that disaster was only a matter of time. By evening, the mountain man had reached a small plateau partway up the mountain. He set down his pack and began examining the terrain, his eyes scanning every detail. Sister Mary, unable to leave him entirely, stayed hidden behind a cluster of trees, praying quietly. She felt powerless but determined. She could warn him, guide him, but ultimately he would make his own choices. Night fell, and the first stars appeared in the sky. The town of Pinecrest settled in for the night, though sleep did not come easily. People whispered about the mountain man, about the nun, and about what might happen next. The forest around them seemed to hum with quiet energy, as if it too was waiting for something. Sister Mary stayed until the last glimpse of him faded into the darkness. She knew the journey ahead would be dangerous, that the mountain man's choices could bring consequences not just to himself but to the entire town. And yet, she could not hate him, nor could she stop the pull she felt toward his courage and determination. In the quiet of that first night, Pinecrest was a town on the edge of change. A stranger had come, a warning had been given, and the mountains awaited. The story was only beginning, and none of them knew how it would unfold. The mountain man slept under the stars. The nun prayed for his safety, and the town below dreamed of what the morning might bring. The arrival of the mountain man had stirred something deep within Pinecrest. Old routines would be questioned, old fears would resurface, and the calm life of the town would never be quite the same again. And high above it all, the mountain stood silent and vast, holding secrets that only the brave, or the foolish, would ever discover. The morning after the mountain man's arrival brought a quiet tension to Pinecrest. The sun rose slowly over the peaks, casting long shadows across the town. Birds sang softly, but their cheerful songs could not hide the unease that had settled among the people. The mountain man had disappeared into the trails the day before, leaving only the memory of his determined steps and the faint trail of his pack. The townspeople spoke in whispers, sharing their concerns, each conversation edged with curiosity and fear. Sister Mary rose early, as she always did, her heart heavy with worry. She prepared breakfast for the small group of children who had come to the convent for lessons and care. Yet her mind was not on eggs or bread. It was on the man in the mountains. She had watched him from afar, and she could not shake the feeling that he was walking into danger. She knew the trails well, the loose rocks, the hidden drop-offs, and the places where the wind could blow without warning. She also knew that the mountains, beautiful as they were, demanded respect. A single mistake could cost someone dearly. By mid-morning, the mountain man had reached a part of the trail that the townspeople rarely visited. Locals called it the Hidden Ridge, a narrow path clinging to the side of the mountain, where the rocks were sharp and the trees sparse. It was a place both breathtaking and dangerous. From the ridge, one could see the entire valley below, the town, the river, and the forests stretching toward the horizon. The mountain man paused often, not out of fear, but out of habit. He studied the terrain, checking the stability of the rocks and noting every possible path forward. Sister Mary, unable to stay at the convent, followed at a distance. She did not call out to him as she had the day before. Instead, she observed quietly, moving along safer trails that allowed her to keep him in view without disturbing him. She whispered prayers as she walked, asking for guidance and protection. Every step she took reminded her of the stories her grandmother had told her as a child, the tales of those who had vanished in the mountains, of travelers who ignored warnings, and of the wisdom that came to those who listened to caution. The townspeople, meanwhile, were divided in their opinions. Some, like the mayor, watched from the town square with a mix of fascination and anxiety. They could see the man's small figure on the distant trail moving with confidence. "He's brave," one resident said quietly to another, "but he's foolish too. That ridge is no place for someone to wander alone." Others argued that the man was following a purpose beyond their understanding. Perhaps he sought something lost in the mountains, something that only someone with courage and knowledge could find. The mountain man moved steadily along the ridge, examining small outcroppings of rock that looked as if they had been untouched for centuries. He knelt to inspect the soil, touched the bark of a lone pine growing stubbornly from a crack in the stone, and traced his fingers along a shallow carving in the rock that told the story of travelers long ago. To him, every detail mattered. The world around him was alive with signs, and he understood that missing even one small clue could change everything. Sister Mary's concern grew. She saw him approach a narrow ledge, one that jutted out over a steep drop. She called out, her voice trembling slightly, "Please, don't do that. It's not safe." Her words carried over the wind, but the mountain man did not pause. He moved carefully, his steps deliberate, his eyes fixed on the path ahead. There was no recklessness in him, only a quiet determination to continue, despite the danger. Sister Mary's hands shook as she covered her mouth, silently pleading with him to turn back. From the valley below, children watched with wide eyes. They could see the figure moving along the ridge, small against the vastness of the mountains. Some of them clutched each other's hands, unsure whether to be impressed or frightened.
"He's amazing!" one whispered.
"But what if he falls?" said another. Their parents tried to calm them, reminding them that the mountains were dangerous and that the man was not like anyone they had ever met. As the day progressed, the mountain man discovered something unusual. A small cave hidden behind a cluster of jagged rocks. Its entrance was almost invisible unless one knew exactly where to look. He knelt at the opening, peering inside. It was dark, but he could see traces of past visitors, scraps of cloth, markings on the walls, and small piles of stone arranged carefully. The cave seemed to tell a story, though the meaning was not immediately clear. The mountain man ran his fingers along the stones, feeling the weight of time and the patience of those who had come before him. Sister Mary arrived at a safe distance from the cave, her eyes wide with concern. "Please don't go in there," she whispered. "It's not meant for visitors." The rocks could fall, or worse. She did not step closer, respecting the man's space, but her worry was palpable. She had seen enough accidents in the mountains to know how quickly a day could turn from calm to catastrophe. The mountain man paused, sensing her presence without turning. There was no malice in her warnings, only care. He nodded slightly, acknowledging her, but continued his exploration. He was not blind to danger. He was simply willing to face it to uncover whatever secrets the cave might hold. He entered carefully, crouching low to avoid scraping his head, and began examining the walls and floor. The air inside was cool and damp, carrying the smell of earth and stone. Every small discovery mattered to him. The way the light fell through a tiny opening, the pattern of the stones, the way the air shifted as he moved deeper. Outside, Sister Mary prayed silently. She could not stop him, and that realization weighed heavily on her. She wished she could do more than watch, but she also understood that the mountain man was not foolish. He had skills she could never fully understand, and he respected the mountains in his own way. Her hope was that his knowledge and caution would protect him, even if her warnings did not. Hours passed. The sun moved across the sky, casting shadows that stretched and shrank with the changing light. The mountain man emerged from the cave, his face calm but thoughtful. He had found nothing dangerous, yet he had learned much. Each small detail of the cave's structure, each mark on the walls told the story of survival and perseverance. He packed up carefully, leaving the cave exactly as he had found it. By late afternoon, he had continued further along the ridge, moving toward a higher peak. Sister Mary followed at a respectful distance, her steps careful to avoid the loose rocks and hidden holes. She whispered another prayer for his safety, her eyes never leaving him. The townspeople, still watching from below, could see the figure moving steadily upward. Anxiety mixed with awe, and the quiet town buzzed with speculation. Some wondered if he was searching for something lost or hidden, perhaps an artifact or a spring known only to the mountains. Others believed he was merely testing himself, seeing how far he could go without needing anyone's help. But all agreed on one thing: the man was extraordinary. Even those who feared for his safety could not help but respect his determination and skill. As evening approached, the wind began to pick up, rustling the sparse trees along the ridge. Clouds rolled over the peaks, casting shadows that made the trail seem narrower and more treacherous. The mountain man adjusted his pack, steadying himself against the wind. He had learned long ago that patience and caution were as important as strength and courage. Every step was measured, every movement deliberate. Sister Mary finally decided it was time to return to the town. She could no longer follow him safely without risking herself. She whispered one last prayer as she turned back, asking for guidance and protection. Her heart ached with worry, but she knew she had done everything she could. The mountain man was on his own now, and she could only hope that his knowledge and caution would carry him safely through the challenges ahead. By nightfall, the town of Pinecrest grew silent once more. Lights flickered in the windows, and families gathered for dinner, sharing stories of the day and discussing the mountain man. Some were inspired, some were fearful, and some simply wondered what would come next. The nun, too, returned to the convent, her thoughts consumed by the man she could not reach, the mountains he navigated, and the lessons hidden in his journey. The mountains themselves stood silent and eternal, watching over the town and the solitary figure who had ventured into their depths. They had seen countless travelers before, some cautious, some reckless, some brave, and some foolish. They would see the mountain man too, and in their quiet way, they would test him, as they had tested many before. And so, the stage was set. The mountain man had ignored the warnings and stepped into the unknown. The nun had given her caution and prayers, and the town waited below, filled with curiosity, admiration, and fear. The story of bravery, caution, and discovery had only just begun, and the mountains held many more secrets yet to be revealed. The days following the mountain man's exploration of the hidden ridge brought a quiet unease to Pinecrest. Life in the town continued on the surface as usual. Shopkeepers opened their stores, children went to school, and chores were done in the familiar rhythm of everyday life. Yet beneath the calm there was tension. People could not stop talking about the man who dared to climb where few had gone, and venture into places the townsfolk considered dangerous. His presence was no longer a curiosity. It had become a concern. Sister Mary walked through the town each morning, her hands folded over her apron, her eyes thoughtful. She listened carefully as neighbors whispered about the mountain man. Some admired him, praising his courage and skill. "He is fearless," one woman said to another as they arranged baskets of apples at the market. "But he is also reckless. Those cliffs are unforgiving." Others feared what might happen if he continued his explorations. "The mountains have their own rules," the mayor said quietly to a group of concerned townspeople. "If he ignores them, we cannot know the consequences." Despite the gossip, the nun could not ignore the truth she had observed herself. The man moved with remarkable care and awareness. He respected the mountains in his own way, noticing details that others overlooked. Each step he took seemed intentional, almost as if he were reading the land like a story written in rocks, trees, and wind. Yet his stubbornness troubled her. He did not follow the simple warnings she offered. He had a purpose she could not fully understand, and she feared that one day his pursuit might lead to harm, not just to him, but possibly to the town below. By mid-morning, the mountain man had climbed higher than he had the day before. He reached a narrow plateau, surrounded by steep cliffs on three sides and a forested slope below. Here the wind whistled through jagged rocks, carrying the crisp scent of pine and earth. He knelt to examine a small stream that trickled from the cliffs, noting its clarity and the way it carved channels through the stone. To him, this was not just water. It was a sign of life, a clue about the terrain, and perhaps a hint about hidden paths. Sister Mary, following carefully at a distance, could see him studying the stream. She called softly, her voice almost lost in the wind. "Please be careful. The water may hide loose stones or slippery paths. Don't risk your life for curiosity." Her words were gentle, yet they carried urgency. The mountain man paused, acknowledging her presence with a slight nod, but he did not step back. He began tracing the stream upward, his eyes scanning the rocks, careful to avoid slipping. As he moved, small signs of the past began to reveal themselves. A tree bent unnaturally as if shaped by wind and time, a stone carved with faint markings, and a pile of rocks that seemed deliberately placed. Each discovery fascinated him, and he made careful notes in his mind, committing every detail to memory. To an ordinary observer, these things might seem insignificant, but the mountain man understood that even the smallest clue could be crucial in understanding the landscape. The townspeople, observing from below, began to grow restless. Some left their homes and shops to climb slightly higher on the gentler trails, hoping for a better view. They watched him with a mixture of admiration and fear. "He is so brave," said a young man to his mother. "But what if he falls?" The mother shook her head. "He seems to know what he is doing, but the mountains are unpredictable. We can only hope he returns safely." Meanwhile, the mountain man discovered another hidden area, a shallow cave almost covered by overgrown bushes and moss. He carefully cleared a path and peered inside. This cave was different from the one he had explored the previous day. It was larger, with walls that bore deeper markings, and a floor covered in leaves and small stones. He could tell that people had been here before, long ago, and that they had left signs of their presence in a way that was respectful of the mountain. He ran his fingers along the carvings, noting the patterns, the shapes, and the careful placement of stones. Sister Mary watched from a safe distance, her heart pounding. She felt a mixture of fear and awe. "Please," she whispered under her breath, "don't do anything dangerous. Just observe and come back safely." She could see that he was not reckless. Every movement was deliberate, careful, and mindful of the surroundings. Yet the nun could not shake the fear that even careful exploration could have unforeseen consequences. As afternoon approached, clouds began to gather over the peaks. The sunlight shifted, casting long shadows across the ridges, and making the paths look narrower. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and the coolness of the higher altitude. The mountain man adjusted his pack, checked his footing, and began to move along the edge of the plateau. He noticed how the rocks were worn and smooth in some areas and jagged in others, how small plants clung stubbornly to the stone, and how tiny animals had left tracks in the mud. Each observation was important, and he made careful mental notes. Below, the town became more uneasy. People noticed the clouds gathering and the wind rising.
"The weather changes quickly in these mountains," said one elder. "I hope he is careful."
One wrong step could be dangerous.
Others argued that he was experienced enough to handle it. "He knows the mountains," said a shopkeeper.
"He's been up there for decades, I'm sure. We shouldn't worry too much." But deep down, even the most optimistic townspeople could not ignore the sense of tension building in the air. The mountain man reached a part of the plateau where the ground sloped sharply downward. A single misstep here could send someone sliding down to the rocks below. He moved cautiously, testing each stone and placing his hands on larger rocks for balance. His experience and focus allowed him to navigate the slope safely, but Sister Mary could see how precarious the situation was. Her heart tightened, and she whispered a prayer that he would remain safe and return to the town without incident. Suddenly he noticed something unusual at the edge of the slope, a collection of stones arranged in a careful pattern. They were not naturally placed. He knelt down, studying the arrangement, and realized that it was a message, a kind of marker left by someone long ago. It was a simple sign, but to the mountain man, it spoke volumes. He understood that the mountains held not only natural beauty, but also stories, guidance, and warnings from those who had walked them before. Sister Mary, hidden behind a cluster of rocks, could see him studying the marker. She called out softly, "Please, don't go too close. It could be dangerous." The man paused, looked in her direction, and gave a small nod, acknowledging her concern. But then, with the same careful attention he had shown all day, he continued to examine the stones in the surrounding area. As evening approached, the clouds thickened, and the first drops of rain began to fall. The mountain man moved quickly but carefully to find shelter under a rock overhang. He gathered loose stones and arranged them to block water from entering, then settled in to rest. Sister Mary, unable to get any closer, stayed hidden behind a tree, watching over him from a distance. Her prayers became more urgent, asking for his protection and for the storm to pass without causing harm. The town below watched the darkening sky. The children who had been curious earlier now stayed close to their families, sensing that the mountains were not just a place of adventure, but also a place of caution. The adults spoke in hushed tones, worried that the mountain man might face danger in the coming storm. The nuns' warnings had been clear, but whether he had listened was uncertain. Throughout the night the mountain man remained alert, listening to the sound of rain on the rocks and feeling the wind against his face. He knew the mountains well enough to understand that caution alone was not enough. Observation, experience, and respect for the natural world were equally important. He studied the patterns of the rain, the movement of the clouds, and the sound of water in the streams below. Every detail mattered. By morning the storm had passed, leaving the mountains glistening under a fresh layer of sunlight. The air was crisp and clean, and the sound of water dripping from leaves and rocks filled the silence. The mountain man emerged from his shelter, refreshed but focused. He continued along the ridge, moving higher and deeper into the mountains, guided by both instinct and experience. Sister Mary returned to the town to rest, but she could not stop thinking about him. She knew that his journey was far from over, and that the mountains still held many secrets. She also knew that the town was beginning to feel the effects of his presence. Curiosity, fear, and admiration were mixing in ways that could influence everyone's actions. The story of the mountain man was no longer just about him. It was about how his choices would affect the lives of the people below. As the sun set over Pinecrest, casting golden light across the rooftops, the town was filled with quiet anticipation. Everyone wondered what the mountain man would discover next and whether he would return safely. Sister Mary prayed silently, and the mountains waited patiently, holding their secrets for those brave enough to seek them. The mountain man's journey continued, each step a balance between courage and caution, each discovery a lesson in patience and respect. And the town of Pinecrest, though far below, felt the ripple of his actions, sensing that their quiet life was beginning to change in ways no one could yet understand. The morning air on the mountain was sharp and crisp, carrying the scent of pine and wet earth from the previous day's storm. The mountain man rose before dawn, stretching his limbs and checking his surroundings. He had slept lightly under the rock overhang, alert even in rest, for he knew the mountains held surprises for those who were unprepared. Every rock, tree, and stream told a story, and he intended to listen carefully. Sister Mary had not slept well. Her mind raced with worry. Though the storm had passed, she knew that the mountains were unpredictable, and the dangers of the previous day could only grow as he climbed higher. She walked along one of the safer trails, trying to get as close as she dared without putting herself at risk. She prayed silently, asking for his safety and hoping that he would heed her warnings before it was too late. The mountain man moved steadily along the ridge. He had discovered a small plateau that overlooked a narrow valley, and from here he could see distant peaks rising into the clouds. He paused, studying the land, noting patterns in the trees, the paths of small animals, and the way water had carved channels through the stone. Every observation mattered. To him, the mountains were not just terrain. They were a story waiting to be read, full of wisdom left by those who had walked before him. He noticed something unusual ahead, a fallen tree that seemed to mark a narrow path leading toward a hidden crevice. It was barely visible, covered by moss and loose rocks. To the average observer, it might have seemed insignificant or too dangerous to follow. But the mountain man had trained his eyes to see what others could not. He approached carefully, testing each step before committing his weight. Sister Mary, hidden behind a distant boulder, called out softly, her voice carrying over the wind. "Please, turn back. The path is too dangerous." The man paused and looked in her direction. He nodded slightly, acknowledging her concern, but he did not step back. He moved forward with deliberate caution, carefully placing his hands and feet, balancing on the uneven ground. Every movement was precise, a dance with the mountain itself. He understood that speed could be fatal and that patience could be his greatest ally. As he entered the narrow crevice, the sunlight dimmed. The walls of rock rose steeply on either side, enclosing him in a world of stone and shadow. Tiny plants clung to cracks in the rock, and the air smelled of damp earth. The mountain man moved slowly, examining markings carved into the stone, ancient symbols that seemed to tell a story of travelers, explorers, and people who had once sought shelter here. He ran his fingers along the markings, recognizing patterns and understanding the care with which they had been made. Sister Mary, though far below, could see the man navigating the crevice. Her heart raced. "Be careful," she whispered to herself. "Every step matters." She knew that the mountain man was skilled, but she also knew that nature could be unpredictable. A rock could shift, a sudden gust of wind could throw off balance, or the ground could give way unexpectedly. Her concern was not for fear of the man, but for the dangers the mountains could bring, no matter how careful he was. Further along the crevice, he discovered a small pool of water, clear and still, reflecting the light that filtered in from above. The water had carved the stone over time, leaving smooth channels and shallow depressions. He knelt to examine it, studying the flow and the patterns in the rock. The pool seemed to tell a story of persistence and patience, a reminder that even the hardest stone could be shaped by quiet determination. Suddenly, a low rumble echoed through the rocks. The mountain man froze, listening carefully. It was not a roar or a crash, but a subtle vibration through the stone beneath him. He crouched lower, testing the stability of the rocks around him. The mountains had a language, and he had learned to understand it. The faintest shift, the slightest tremor, could mean the difference between safety and danger. Sister Mary heard the rumble as well and gasped, clutching a tree branch for balance. "Please," she whispered, "let him be safe." The mountain man continued, moving slowly and carefully until he reached the hidden crevice's end. Here, the rock opened into a small natural chamber. The ceiling was high enough to stand, and sunlight filtered through cracks above, casting dancing patterns on the floor. On the walls were carvings and markings, some geometric, some symbolic, clearly made by people long ago. There were small piles of stones arranged carefully, perhaps as offerings or messages for those who might come after. He studied the chamber intently. Each detail mattered, each pattern told a story. He could see evidence of past travelers, their care, and their respect for the mountain. To the mountain man, this was not just a discovery. It was a connection across time, a reminder that people had walked these paths before him, faced challenges and left guidance for those who would follow. But the town below was unaware of the chamber. All they knew was that the mountain man had entered a dangerous part of the mountain and had ignored the nun's warnings. Rumors began to spread quickly. "He's reckless," some said. "He's putting himself in danger, and the town will suffer if something happens to him." Others argued the opposite.
"He's careful," they said. "He knows what he's doing."
We should admire his courage and skill. The nun, Sister Mary, had returned to the town's edge after ensuring the man was temporarily safe in the chamber. She spoke with the mayor and several concerned townspeople. "He is not foolish," she said, "but he is stubborn. He listens to reason only so much, and he will continue to explore at his own risk." We can only pray for his safety and hope that the mountains guide him." The townspeople debated quietly, some nodding in agreement, others shaking their heads in worry. Meanwhile, the mountain man left the chamber, continuing upward toward a higher ridge. Here the slope grew steeper, and loose stones littered the path. He used his hands and a sturdy branch for balance, testing each foothold carefully before moving forward. The wind picked up, stronger now, whistling through the rocks and trees. Clouds had returned, moving swiftly across the peaks, and the sunlight flickered with the shifting shadows. From the valley below, the townspeople could see him navigating the ridge. Some felt admiration, some fear, and some a mix of both. They whispered urgently, discussing what might happen if the man continued. The storm from the previous day had reminded them that the mountains were not forgiving. Even the most skilled traveler could be caught off guard by a sudden change in weather or a hidden obstacle. The mountain man reached a section of the ridge where the trail narrowed to just a few feet wide. On one side, the rock face rose sharply. On the other, the drop plunged toward the forest far below. He paused, examining the path ahead. Every movement had to be deliberate. He shifted his pack carefully, testing balance, and took slow, steady steps. Sister Mary watched from a distance, holding her breath, whispering prayers for each careful step. Along the narrow path, he discovered a cluster of rocks arranged in a circle. At first glance, it seemed random, but he quickly realized it had been placed deliberately, perhaps as a marker or signal. He knelt to examine it, running his fingers along the stones, sensing the intention behind the placement. It reminded him of the human presence in the mountains, the care, respect, and wisdom of those who had come before. As afternoon turned into evening, the clouds thickened, and a chill moved through the air. The wind carried a low hum through the rocks, a sound that could be unsettling to those unfamiliar with the mountains. The mountain man moved carefully, finding shelter under an overhanging rock to rest and observe. He built a small barrier with loose stones to protect against falling debris and settled in to wait for the light to fade, knowing that darkness would bring even greater challenges. Sister Mary returned to the town to inform the townspeople. "He is safe for now," she said, "but the mountains demand respect. We cannot control him, but we must remain vigilant and ready to help if needed." The townspeople nodded, their anxiety tempered by the nun's calm but concerned presence. They realized that this man, brave and stubborn as he was, had brought a new energy to their quiet town, an energy filled with curiosity, admiration, and fear. That night, the mountain man slept lightly under the stars. He had faced the challenges of the day with patience and skill, yet he knew that the mountain still held secrets and trials ahead. Each step, each discovery, had prepared him for what was to come. He understood that his journey was not just about reaching a destination, but about learning from the mountains, respecting their wisdom, and moving forward with care. Sister Mary in the convent below prayed long into the night. She asked for guidance, for protection, and for wisdom, for both the mountain man and the townspeople who watched anxiously from below. She knew that the next day could bring challenges that would test courage, patience, and faith. The mountains had a way of teaching lessons to those who ventured into their heights, and she hoped that both the man and the town would learn what was needed to face the trials ahead. And so, the stage was set. The mountain man had faced new challenges, discovered hidden places, and continued to ignore the simple warnings he had been given. The nun had done everything she could to guide him safely. The town waited below, caught between admiration, curiosity, and fear. The mountains, vast and eternal, held their secrets, and the next day promised a turning point that would change everything. The morning air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of pine and wet earth. The sun had just begun to rise over the peaks, casting a golden light across the valley and the town of Pinecrest below. Birds sang softly, and the river sparkled in the early light, but a quiet tension hung over the town. Everyone had been waiting, some with curiosity, others with worry. The mountain man had climbed higher than anyone had dared, and the town had seen him disappear into the hidden ridges and crevices of the mountain. Today, something was certain to happen. The mountain man woke early, stretching carefully and checking the terrain around him. His sleep had been light and cautious. The mountains never allowed complete rest. Each sound, each shift in the wind could be important. He packed his belongings efficiently, storing them in his well-worn backpack, and adjusted the small rope he carried. Today, he intended to reach the peak, a place few in Pinecrest had ever seen, a place that had been described in old stories as breathtaking and perilous. Sister Mary, back in the town, could not remain still. She had prayed throughout the night, her hands folded, and her heart heavy with concern. Though she understood the mountain man's skill and patience, she also knew that the peaks held dangers beyond human control. A sudden storm, a loose rock, or even a misstep could bring disaster. She walked to the edge of the nearest hill where she could see the mountain trails, hoping to catch a glimpse of him. Her voice carried softly on the morning wind. "Please, be careful. Don't take unnecessary risks." The mountain man paused at a narrow ledge, overlooking a small waterfall that fell into a crystal-clear pool below. The water sparkled in the sunlight, rushing over smooth stones and creating a gentle mist. He admired this scene briefly, noting the natural patterns and beauty. Then, with careful attention, he continued along the ledge. Every step was measured. Loose stones were tested, branches used for balance, and each movement deliberate. Even the smallest mistake could lead to danger, but he moved with confidence rooted in experience. Back in the town, whispers had turned into full conversation. People had gathered at higher points, trying to see him without endangering themselves. Some feared that today might be the day he faced something beyond his skill, while others felt a sense of awe at his bravery.
He is extraordinary, one elder said.
He knows the mountains like no one else, but we cannot ignore the risks. Even a strong man can face trouble in the peaks. The mountain man reached a hidden path, leading toward the final climb. Here, the trail was narrow and steep, flanked by jagged rocks. The wind had grown stronger, moving in unpredictable gusts that could easily throw off balance. He slowed his pace, testing each foothold carefully, pressing the soles of his boots against the stone to make sure they were secure. The mountain demanded respect, and he was giving it fully, even while pursuing his goal. Sister Mary had followed as far as she could safely go. From her vantage point, she watched him navigate the narrow trail. Her heart raced with worry, yet she knew he was capable. Still, she whispered another prayer, asking for guidance and protection. The town below had begun to gather, sensing that the events on the mountain were no longer just curiosity. They were a story that would soon affect everyone. As the mountain man climbed, he discovered another natural formation, a small, rocky alcove that seemed almost hidden. It was sheltered from the wind and provided a moment of rest. He knelt to examine the stones, noting patterns that suggested previous travelers had been there. Small piles of rocks had been carefully arranged, perhaps to mark the path or provide a message. To him, this was not just a marker. It was a story left by those who had walked the mountains before, a message of wisdom and caution. Suddenly the wind shifted, stronger than before, carrying a low hum through the rocks. The mountain man paused, listening carefully. He could sense subtle movements in the stones, a sign that the mountain itself was testing him. He crouched low, placing his hands on stable rocks and adjusted his position to maintain balance. Every movement was deliberate. He had learned that rushing could be dangerous, even for someone with skill and experience. Below, the townspeople watched, their eyes following the small figure high above. Some were anxious, others fascinated. The mayor spoke quietly to a group of neighbors. "He is skilled, yes, but the mountains are unpredictable. We must be ready to help if needed." Others nodded, some holding their children close, others gripping the railing of the hilltop. Everyone could feel the tension in the air, the sense that something important was about to happen. The mountain man reached the final ridge leading to the peak. The trail was now a narrow ledge of stone, with sheer drops on both sides. He moved carefully, testing every step, adjusting his weight, and using his hands to steady himself. His focus was intense, his mind aware of every detail, the texture of the rocks, the grip of his boots, the direction of the wind. Sister Mary's voice, carried faintly on the breeze, reminded him of caution, though he could not see her from this height. At last he reached the peak. The view was breathtaking. Pinecrest lay far below, its streets, rooftops, and river visible like a painting. The mountains stretched endlessly in all directions, their peaks touching the sky. The wind was strong, but it did not shake him. He knelt, feeling the rock beneath his hands, breathing in the crisp air, and absorbing the beauty and power of the mountains. Here he felt a connection to nature, to the past travelers who had left their marks, and to the town below that watched him from afar. The town erupted in quiet astonishment as the figure on the peak became visible. People gasped, pointed, and whispered. "He made it," one woman said. "He really made it." Children cheered softly, and even the elders smiled, though worry remained. Sister Mary felt a mixture of relief and awe. She knew he had reached the peak safely, but the journey back down would be just as demanding, perhaps more so. The mountain had given him a test, and he had passed it. But the challenge was not over. The mountain man remained at the peak for a moment, studying the terrain. He noted the safest path down, the loose rocks to avoid, and the natural markers that would guide him. He understood that his choices now could affect not only his safety but also the town below. Every step had meaning. Every decision mattered. Slowly, deliberately, he began the descent, following the path he had chosen, using skill, patience, and observation to navigate the steep ledges and narrow trails. Sister Mary followed as closely as she safely could, praying all the while. She could see the townspeople watching, some with admiration, others with anxiety. The journey down was tense, each movement careful. The mountain man demonstrated the wisdom of experience, moving without haste but without hesitation. Loose rocks were tested, careful handholds found, and every step measured. As he neared the lower ridges, the wind began to calm, the sun warmed the rocks, and the sense of danger eased slightly. The townspeople could see him clearly now, and their fear gave way to admiration. He had faced the peaks, navigated the hidden crevices, and returned safely. Yet the lessons of the mountain were not lost. The town realized that courage alone was not enough. Careful observation, respect, and patience were just as important. Finally, the mountain man reached the forested slope leading back toward Pinecrest. He paused briefly, looking back at the trail he had conquered. Every mark, every stone, and every step told a story. He had faced challenges, discovered hidden places, and respected the mountain throughout. Sister Mary, who had followed as close as she could safely manage, stepped forward from the trees, her face a mix of relief and pride. "You have done well," she said softly. "But remember, the mountains demand respect at every step." The townspeople gathered at the edge of the forest, cheering softly and clapping. Their fear had turned to admiration. They saw not only a man who had climbed to heights few could imagine, but also the lessons he had taught them about courage, patience, and respect for the natural world. Children looked up at him with wide eyes, inspired by his skill and determination. Elders nodded in acknowledgement, understanding that the man's journey had left a mark on the town's spirit as well. In the days that followed, the town returned to its usual rhythm, but the memory of the mountain man's journey remained. Stories were told of his careful steps, his observations, and his respect for the mountains. The nun continued her daily prayers, thankful for his safe return and grateful for the lessons learned. The mayor spoke of the importance of caution, courage, and community, reminding everyone that bravery was best guided by wisdom and care. The mountain man, having completed his journey, prepared to leave Pinecrest. He had come in search of understanding, and he had found it in the mountains, in the hidden paths, and in the town that had watched and worried. He had faced danger, respected the land, and returned safely, leaving a story that would be remembered for generations. The mountains stood silently, their peaks touched by sunlight, their slopes marked by the footsteps of the mountain man. The town of Pinecrest, though quiet once more, carried a new energy, a mixture of respect for nature, admiration for courage, and appreciation for careful wisdom. And in the hearts of those who had watched and prayed, a quiet lesson endured. Bravery is not the absence of fear, but the careful choice to face it with respect, patience, and thoughtfulness. The mountain man disappeared into the forests beyond the town, leaving behind a tale of courage and wisdom. The nun returned to her routines, her prayers now filled with gratitude. and the town of Pinecrest continued its life, forever changed by the events on the mountain, inspired by the man who had climbed, listened, and returned safely to share the story with all who would listen.